To the story now, President Cyril Ramaphosa will officially close the ANC Women's League conference later this afternoon. The Elective conference hopes to put the task team behind it as the formal structure prepares to take over. The newly elected leadership is also expected to be unveiled. SABC News reporter Natasha Phiri is covering the story and joins us now with the very latest. Good afternoon, Natasha. Perhaps to start with the status of the voting, how far is the voting process?
Well, good afternoon, Mfundo, and to our viewers once again. Well, voting has actually concluded. What we do know now is that delegates are actually behind closed doors, and of course, the issue at hand that actually discussing are those around the ANC Women's League's policy documents. But I think one issue that is of concern is the issue of time. Mfundo, you would know that today is the last day of conference. Like you've correctly cited there earlier on, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address delegates in closed conference, but also besides them, just announcing the newly elected leadership, there also is that lengthy process of nominating those additional members of the ANC Women's League, the ANC Women's League NEC members, which is a lengthy process because nominations have to come. There's some nominations that will also arise from the floor. Then it's the issue of election and announcement. So it's not so clear if they will actually announce those 40 additional members here. So the issue of time is one of great concern. What we're seeing now is delegates just going down. I think they're actually going down to go have lunch, and maybe after the expectation was that we should see some movement at 1 o'clock, but it seems as if the program will be delayed a bit further, which also then begs the question that is there enough time that is actually given to the policy discussion documents of the ANC Women's League? I mean, I'm just browsing through it. It's like 67 pages long, Fundo, and really begs the question, do they have enough time to robustly debate, those issues and to actually interact and have an engagement, proper engagement around the policies of the ANC Women's League? Because these are the very same policies that will need to be adopted and implemented by the ANC Women's League.
Would be the most important as opposed to the electing of the leadership, that you need to be discussing policy. But then to another development from yesterday, the reports of the withdrawal of Dlamini. What more do we know around that and the decision itself? Was it purely because of the fewer nominations, or what exactly is going on there?
Well, it's not so clear at this point, in front. Of course, there have been talks that indeed she will actually withdraw. But I mean, there was that announcement, like you've correctly cited, of the three women who are actually vying for that position. Of course, we saw CCC Tolashe receiving 1,564 branch nominations, followed by Temega Mkhunu, who received 796, and of course for her, Dlamini, who received 258. And the expectation was that because she's a former ANC Women's League president, she would actually come out much more stronger. But this was not the case. Of course, we had heard reports, 2 nights before, on Friday evening, that, there were talks around Temega Mkhunu's people and Dlamini's people to actually somewhat consolidate and come together, as or under one slate, so that their votes don't actually get divided. But of course, like you've correctly cited, there are these reports that are coming out. It would be interesting to see what actually goes on inside plenary. But a person who actually publicly had declined is that of Osisi Ntombela. That she wanted to come back as the league's deputy president, but of course she declined nomination. An interesting phenomenon that we saw was the issue of the late ANC MP Tina Johannesburg-Peterson, who a moment of silence was actually given to her. But of course, just revealing those numbers of the number of branch nominations that she got, it was over 1,000, which was quite overwhelming, Mfundo. So these are just some of the quite interesting developments that came out of conference. There's another one as well, where an issue of some delegates from the Northwest Province actually physically fighting at the registration venue. Of course, we heard that the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula saying that disciplinary measures will be held against these very delegates that were actually fighting. You would know that the Northwest Province had issues in in terms of registration, I mean, at some point, just briefing members of the media, the leadership of the ANC Women's League National Task Team had said that even if we have to proceed without the Northwest delegation, they will have to actually do that, because there were allegations. We even got calls as SABC News to say that they are bogus delegates from the Northwest Conference, but seemingly that issue has been resolved. Of course, the outstanding issue now is to know what kind of disciplinary measures will be meted out against those two delegates from the Northwest. The expectation was that we are actually going to speak to Khusela Diko, but I understand that she is quite busy right now. But just to find out what the program will actually look like, especially towards the end of this day. Will the president actually address these delegates before 7, or will it be after 7 p.m.? Would be interesting to find out.
And then just in closing, before I let you go, speaking on the SG, what was the reception to that address that he made yesterday, particularly when he spoke about the need for members of the Women's League to be independent and not find themselves being involved in these proxy battles for men in the mother body? What has been the reception on the ground? Are they speaking in the same voice to say they need to reclaim their autonomy, they don't want to be drawn into battles by men?
True, it was received quite well, Mfundo, because, I mean, you would see, I mean, just also judging by various provincial conferences that we saw in the past, the impression that was given was that women are always fighting the battles of men and not actually fighting their own battles, not standing up for one another. So that was a clarion call that was actually given by the Secretary General of the ANC, Mr. Fikile Mbalula, saying that it's high time that women actually fight for one another, and actually vote for one another, not fight factional battles of men in the mother body. But Mfundo, if you'll just please permit me to just speak and engage with Khusela Diko. Khusela, thank you so much for joining us in SABC News. How's the program running? Is everything smooth? What time are we going to start? What time will we know who the newly elected leadership of the ANC Women's League will be?
Well, thank you very much, Natasha, for having us on the show. Unfortunately, the program is running a bit behind. You'll remember that we lost a day because of the registration challenges that we have experienced, but also the voting overnight would have taken a bit of time. In fact, the last province to vote, which was KwaZulu-Natal, only finished voting this morning around 10 o'clock. Now, as far as the results go, when the chairperson of the elections committee was presenting, the process around voting, she indicated counting will take about 3 hours or so. So if you were to be optimistic, I think around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock this afternoon, we should have those results out. But the work of conference is continuing. At this point, the drafting commission is meeting. They've looked at draft resolutions that are going to be put before delegates to discuss. And we're really going to try and catch up as much time as possible this afternoon before the president comes to address conference.
But the concern is enough time actually given to, these draft resolutions and policy resolutions? You've got good policies on paper, but, problem is the implementation. Also problems that, do your delegates actually read through these discussion documents?
Well, I think a starting point for this conference, which we said even before conference commenced, was the fact that the ANC itself has recently come from a national conference where we spent a lot of time, both in the first leg of conference as well as the second, discussing policies and resolutions. Now, as the Women's League, we obviously draw our existence from the ANC, and we're part and parcel of developing those policies. So what we're doing here is really fine-tuning them to ensure that they've got a gender lens, so as the ANC implements policies and us as members do that, we give them the necessary gender perspective. We don't doubt that more needs to be done, which is why even coming to conference, we try and get our branches to engage as much as possible on the issues. But also remember, these are members of the ANC, of the Women's League, who are grounded, in the communities that they come from. So they're very much knowledgeable of the issues, and they do bring that perspective even as we discuss. But I don't think that we're discounting the possibility of a second leg of conference, perhaps even a hybrid, to ensure that we've really crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's that we need to.
Those two delegates from the Northwest who are, physically fighting, what is the status update in terms of, the disciplinary measures that will be meted out against them?
Well, every conference has got a conference disciplinary committee. At this point, I wouldn't want to go into, discussing those two particular delegates, but to say that even as the SG of the ANC had said, such behavior in the ANC and the Women's League is not tolerated. And as and when instances of that nature arise, our constitution and our disciplinary rules do kick in. And even in this case, we will ensure that those matters are not left unattended.
Ms. Diko, thank you so much for that update. Of course, we will catch up with you later on. Thank you so much. Of course, that was Khusela Diko. Also just updating us on what's actually happening right now, Mfundo, in terms of conference. Like you've heard her say that unfortunately there are delays. So of course the program of today will be delayed further on. We do expect some movement, like she said, around 2 or 3 o'clock. And of course we will keep you updated as SABC News. So we do implore our viewers to stay tuned to SABC News and make us your news channel of choice. With that said, it's back to you in studio, Mfundo.
Much, Natasha. That's our reporter Natasha Phiri just giving us an update on the ANC Women's League conference that's currently underway.